I want to begin tonight with a question, not a comfortable question, not the kind of question you can answer over a cup of tea and then go to bed and sleep soundly. I want to ask you a question that I believe sits at the very heart of what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. And the question is this: what does it mean to worship? Now, I suspect a number of you came here tonight expecting me to talk about implantable microchips. Perhaps you saw the title and thought, here we go, another lecture about RFID technology and end times prophecy and whether Bill Gates is hiding something in a vaccine. And I understand the expectation. That conversation is everywhere. It is on the internet, it is in church basements, it is on late night radio. But I am going to ask you to set that conversation aside for the next hour, not because it is unimportant, but because I believe with everything in me that it is a distraction from something infinitely more dangerous. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is, I think, one of the most urgent ideas that has emerged from my decades of engagement with both the scientific world and the Christian scriptures. And if I am right, and I want you to test this carefully, then the real mark of the beast is not coming. It is already here. It is already operating. And most of us, including most people who go to church, are already participating in it without realizing it. Now, I have spent the better part of 50 years reading the book of Revelation. I have read it in Greek. I have sat with it in the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. I have debated its meaning with some of the finest minds in the world. And one thing I can tell you with absolute confidence is this: the book of Revelation is not primarily a book about technology. It is a book about allegiance. It is a book about worship. And if you read it as a technology manual, you will miss the entire point. Let me take you to the text. Revelation chapter 13. The passage that has generated more speculation, more fear, more best-selling novels and Hollywood films than almost any other passage in the entire Bible. John writes about a beast rising from the sea. He writes about a second beast who compels all, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark. And for the last 40 years, the dominant reading of that passage in popular Christian culture has been essentially this. It refers to some form of electronic tracking technology. A chip, a barcode, a quantum dot tattoo, some mechanism of digital control. I want to take that interpretation seriously because I think it contains a genuine insight. Yes, Revelation is talking about economic control. Yes, it is talking about a system that excludes those who refuse to comply. Yes, there is something deeply prophetic about the way John describes a coercive global power that demands participation and punishes resistance. I do not dismiss any of that, but here is my question. What is the mark actually marking? What does it signify? Because in the ancient world, and John was writing in the ancient world to ancient people using ancient symbolic categories, a mark on the forehead or the hand was not primarily a technological concept. It was a covenantal concept. It was a concept of ownership and loyalty. You see, in the ancient Near East, slaves were sometimes branded or tattooed with the name or mark of their owner. Soldiers bore the marks of their commanders, and in the Jewish tradition, the concept of binding the law to your hand and your forehead, which comes directly from Deuteronomy chapter 6, was a metaphor for complete devotion. When Moses says, "These commandments are to be on your hearts, bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be as frontlets between your eyes," he is not describing a literal tattooing procedure. He is describing total orientation, complete surrender of thought and action to God. The hand represents what you do. The forehead represents what you think. Together, they represent the totality of the human person. So when Revelation talks about receiving the mark of the beast on your hand and your forehead, it is using the same framework in reverse. It is talking about a total orientation away from God and toward an alternative power. An alternative object of ultimate allegiance. It is talking about what you do and what you think being surrendered, not to the living God, but to a counterfeit. And now I want to ask you something. I want you to think about it carefully. Is that not already happening? Let me introduce you to a concept that I have come to believe is the closest thing our modern world has to a genuine fulfillment of the Revelation pattern. And I want to be careful here because I am not making a simple one-to-one identification. I am not saying this particular technology is the beast. I am saying that the logic, the spiritual logic of what Revelation is warning against is being enacted in our time in ways that are far more sophisticated and far more dangerous than a microchip. Consider what has happened to human attention over the last 20 years. In 2004, the average human attention span was measured at approximately 12 seconds. By 2015, after the smartphone had become ubiquitous, that number had dropped to 8 seconds. 8 seconds. Microsoft published that study. For context, the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. We are now less capable of sustained attention than a goldfish. Now, why does that matter? Because the capacity for sustained attention is the capacity for worship. It is the capacity to orient the whole self. Thought, desire, will towards something beyond the immediate and the trivial. Every great spiritual tradition in human history has understood that prayer, contemplation, the encounter with the transcendent requires the ability to be still, to focus, to resist distraction. And we are living in a civilization that has systematically dismantled that capacity. This did not happen by accident. I want to be very precise about this. The business model of the most powerful companies in human history is predicated on the capture and monetization of human attention. Former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris, a man who worked inside the machine, has said publicly that the smartphone is a slot machine in your pocket. The same neurological reward pathways that make gambling addictive have been deliberately engineered into social media platforms. The variable ratio reinforcement schedule, the mechanism that keeps a rat pressing a lever, has been deployed against the minds of 3 billion human beings. And what are those 3 billion minds being oriented toward? What is the object of their sustained attention, their emotional investment, their loyalty, their fear, their desire? Increasingly, it is a system that knows you better than you know yourself, a system that tracks your location, your purchases, your relationships, your opinions, your anxieties, a system that curates your reality. A system that, and this is the crucial point, tells you what to think and what to do. Hand and forehead, action and thought. Now I want to bring in another dimension of this because I think it is essential to understanding what is truly at stake. In 2023, the combined revenue of just 5 technology companies, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, and Meta, exceeded the GDP of most nations on Earth. These are not merely companies, they are civilizational powers. And they are constructing something that no previous civilization has had the capacity to construct, a total environment. An environment in which human consciousness is perpetually managed, stimulated, shaped, and redirected. The philosopher Albert Borgman wrote decades ago about what he called the device paradigm, the way in which technology progressively hides its own machinery and demands only our consumption and compliance. You do not need to understand how your smartphone works. You do not need to understand the algorithms that shape what you see. You simply need to participate, simply need to engage, simply need to open the app, and participation is rewarded. Resistance is penalized. Sound familiar? But here is where I want to go deeper, because I think the really dangerous question is not about technology at all. The really dangerous question is about the human heart. And this is where I find the book of Revelation to be almost uncomfortably prescient. In Revelation chapter 13, when the text says that people worship the beast, it does not suggest that they are forced to worship it against their will. They worship willingly. They worship enthusiastically. In chapter 13, verse 4, we read the words of the crowd, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" This is the language of admiration, of awe, of a people who have found something worthy of their ultimate trust, something that seems to have all power, all knowledge, all provision. And they give it their devotion, not because a gun is pointed at their head, but because the beast seems to deliver. Does that not describe something of our relationship with the digital ecosystem? I am not speaking as a technophobe. I want to be clear about that. I use technology. I believe technology is a gift. I believe the human capacity for creativity and tool making reflects something of the image of God in us. Francis Bacon was right that knowledge is power, and the application of knowledge to the relief of human suffering is among the most noble things we can do. But there is a profound difference between using a tool and worshipping a system. There is a difference between employing technology in the service of human flourishing and surrendering the governance of your inner life to an algorithm. And this is where I want to spend a moment on what I consider the deepest danger. It is not surveillance. It is not economic exclusion. It is something more intimate and more devastating than either of those things. It is the erosion of the self, the dissolution of the integrated human person who is capable of moral reasoning, sustained relationship, genuine love, and encounter with the transcendent. The psychologist Jean Twenge, in her landmark study published in 2017, found that among American teenagers who spent 5 or more hours per day on their devices, the rate of depressive symptoms was 66% higher than among those who spent 1 hour or less. That is not a marginal finding. That is a civilizational warning signal. We are raising a generation whose inner lives are being colonized, whose capacity for solitude, which is, as Blaise Pascal observed, the very capacity that makes us capable of knowing God, is being methodically destroyed, Pascal wrote in the 17th century. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He was right then. He is terrifyingly right now, because the digital economy has built its entire architecture on the prevention of that quiet room. The notification, the ping, the scroll, the endless novelty. These are not accidental features. They are the product of billions of dollars of research specifically designed to ensure that you never have to be alone with your own thoughts. And why does that matter theologically? Because the encounter with God happens in precisely that space. Be still and know that I am God, says the psalmist. Go into your room and close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen, says Jesus. The mystics of every Christian tradition, from the Desert Fathers to John of the Cross to Thomas Merton, have understood that the soul's encounter with God requires the cultivation of interior silence. And we are living in a world that has declared war on interior silence. Now I want to address something that I know some of you are thinking. You are thinking, Professor Lennox, this is all very interesting, but is it not a bit of a stretch to call this the mark of the beast? Surely that is apocalyptic hyperbole. And I want to take that challenge seriously. I am not saying that Mark Zuckerberg is the Antichrist. I am not saying that TikTok is the whore of Babylon, though the metaphor of a seductive system that intoxicates the nations is not without a certain resonance. What I am saying is this: the spiritual logic that Revelation is diagnosing, the substitution of a human-constructed system for the living God as the primary object of human trust, devotion, and orientation, that spiritual logic is not a future danger. It is a present reality. And the fact that it does not come with horns and a dramatic musical score makes it more dangerous, not less. C.S. Lewis understood this. In the Screwtape Letters, the senior demon Screwtape advises his nephew Wormwood, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. The beast of Revelation does not arrive with a fanfare. It arrives with the terms and conditions agreement that nobody reads. And here is what I find most sobering of all. In Revelation chapter 14, the counterpart to chapter 13, those who have not received the mark of the beast are described as those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They are described as those who keep the commandments of God and hold fast to the testimony of Jesus. And what is the testimony of Jesus? It is the testimony of a person who, in the wilderness, faced a being who offered him all the kingdoms of the world, all the power, all the provision, all the protection, and said no. Who, in Gethsemane, with the whole weight of human destiny upon him, went alone into the dark and prayed. Who, on the cross, refused to save himself. The testimony of Jesus is the testimony of a person whose ultimate allegiance was not to any earthly system, however powerful, however appealing, however able to meet immediate needs. That is the alternative that Revelation is placing before us, not the choice between a microchip and no microchip. The choice between orientation toward a system that ultimately diminishes us and orientation toward the one who made us, knows us, and is calling us into a freedom and a fullness that no algorithm can replicate and no platform can provide. So what does this mean practically? I want to close with something concrete, because I am an empiricist by training, and I believe ideas must have consequences in how we live. If the real danger of the mark is the surrender of the integrated self, thought and action, hand and forehead, to a system that competes with God for our ultimate allegiance, then the countercultural act of our time is not to refuse a hypothetical future microchip. It is to recover the disciplines that form and protect the interior life. The practice of prayer, which is the deliberate orientation of attention toward God. The practice of solitude, which is the refusal to fill every moment with stimulation. The practice of the Sabbath, which is at its heart a weekly declaration that your value is not determined by your productivity and your life does not belong to any economic system. The practice of deep reading, which builds the very cognitive muscles that the attention economy is designed to atrophy. The practice of face-to-face community, which provides the embodied human connection that no social network can replace. These are not nostalgic retreats from modernity. They are acts of resistance. They are, in the language of Revelation, the refusal of the mark. They are the mark of a different kind, the mark of people who belong to someone else, who are known by someone else, whose names, as the book of Revelation puts it, are written in a different register entirely. In the year 2024, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania found that people who deleted social media from their phones for just 4 weeks showed measurable improvements in life satisfaction, reductions in anxiety and depression, and, this is the part I find most striking, a significant increase in their sense of meaning and purpose. 4 weeks. The interior life does not take long to begin recovering once the noise stops. I have been a Christian for most of my adult life. I've also been a mathematician and a scientist. And in both of those vocations, I have learned to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it is uncomfortable. The evidence of Scripture, rigorously read, tells me that the deepest danger is never external. It is always the danger of misplaced worship, the danger of giving the throne of the self to something that is not God. And the evidence of our moment in history tells me that that danger has never been more present, more sophisticated, or more warmly welcomed than it is today. The question is not whether a scanner will one day read a chip in your wrist. The question is who or what is already reading you? Who or what is already shaping your desires, directing your attention, curating your reality, and telling you what to fear and what to trust? And the deeper question, the question that I think is worth carrying home tonight, the question that I hope will keep some of you awake in the best possible sense, is this: to whom do you belong? Not in theory, not in the statement of faith you might sign in church, but in the actual texture of your daily life, in the first thing you reach for when you wake up and the last thing you look at before you sleep, in the thoughts that occupy you when no one is watching, in the place where your ultimate security rests, in the thing that if you lost it would feel like losing yourself. That is the question Revelation is asking. That has always been the question. And in the 21st century, it has never been more urgent, more contested, or more costly to answer rightly, thank you,